We have another fabulous guest on our show today for season 7. I have Reed here. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing wonderful. For all of our viewers out there, my first question, and also the most prominent one for right now, could you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I go by Reed. If you are looking at my books, the full name I'm published under is R.A. Sweeney, the R being for Reed. So I was raised in a Catholic setting that I'm absolutely not trying to bash the Catholic tradition as a whole, but the local experience I had with it just really was very it felt like just going through the motions. There wasn't any depth to it, and really there wasn't any God to it. And so I quickly realized like this isn't helping me find the God that I know is there, and didn't really know how to approach it until much later in life. My wife and I, kind of at the same time, just really felt like we should find a church and start attending church regularly and figuring some of these things out. Um, and so we started going to church for a while. After it didn't take long, in less than a year, both my wife and I had surrendered our lives to Jesus. And as part of our experience with that church, um, it was right before COVID that the person who was leading the prayer ministry for the church had left, and I was like, I'm not good at praying, so I should take over that. And so we started leading that as part of like me trying to learn to pray better myself, like forcing me to develop the habits and learn it because I had to teach it. And so then like right after that COVID hit, and so it ended up needing to change just a little bit, and so it became pretty virtual. And really through that sort of time I really dove into biblical scholarship quite a bit, and realized like I just had a lot of questions that weren't getting answered. And so um, I really dove deep into scholarship and really examining each and every piece of what I believed and what I'd been taught, and kind of filtering that through what scholars were really studying in Scripture. To try to rebuild that into something a bit more productive, a bit deeper. And In the process, I ended up teaching myself Greek and Hebrew because I'm a nerd like that. And so that's been interesting, going through those language changes and things like that. So really just kind of dove in with both feet into being a Bible nerd during the few years since COVID really hit, and we kind of had to upend the way that we did church.
Mhm. And that's really quite a shift actually to go from Catholicism to following Jesus because that they believe a lot differently than what, that Jesus has taught us to teach to to be. I would just say that.
Yeah,
So
and
tell me
I'm always I'm
about
I'm very careful with how I approach that because there are a lot of Catholic doctrines that I would say are not reconcilable with the teaching of Scripture.
Mhm.
From my understanding, I'm never going to go to a Catholic and say, because you're Catholic, you don't know Jesus and you're not following him. There are plenty of Catholics that I know that love Jesus and are following him to the best of their ability, which is all any of us can hope to do.
Yeah.
And like I said, those doctrines aren't reconcilable from my understanding. I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding, but I don't know everything, and there are a lot of people a lot smarter than me. I'm not going to claim that I am the end all of knowing these things. So for anybody Catholic that's listening or even just talking to me, like I'm not going to condemn Catholicism, but you're right. It teaches a very different picture and a very different walk.
Yeah. Understandable. That's what I was meaning.
No, I gotcha.
For sure. So when you reached out to me, Reed, you were talking to me about your 7-part series and that this series is very important to you. So can you elaborate about that?
Absolutely. So I kind of segued or set up the segue a little bit before. So as I was diving into scholarship and kind of reassessing my faith, I was writing out a lot of my understanding, and I was kind of formatting it to be a book just in case I wanted to do something with it. And my wife brought up while I was doing that. She's like, we've been sending out this virtual prayer ministry for it had been what 2 3 years at that point. She's like, you've been doing all this, you've got it all written down, what if you turn that into a book? And so what we had started doing very shortly after COVID sort of isolated things was I transitioned to kind of a prompting that I would email out to the church every week of like, here's some stuff in scripture, how to pray. And then people would be emailing me throughout the week of like, here's what's going on that we can be praying for. And I'd be, compiling all those. And I left that just as part of that ministry, but I took the actual case studies that I was doing on prayer and compiled all those because what I'd realized early on, like I'm kind of just grabbing whatever hits me at the moment and making something up. It was not real organized or structured. And I was like, why don't we just start in Genesis and just work our way through the Bible and see what the Bible says about prayer? Um, and so that's what I had started doing pretty early on in that virtual ministry was, I started with Genesis 1 and just started reading until I hit a prayer. And then I wrote a short little case study on it, which the first one, and it's arguable whether or not it's a prayer, but it's when Adam sees the woman and he's like, whoa, this is awesome. I'm paraphrasing. Um, that's a little known Hebrew variant is he says, "Well, ho, ho, this is awesome. Not at last, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." I'm kidding. But like that's the first prayer is just this super excited. And that was the first, just did a short case study about just like recognizing when God provides exactly what you need and just celebrating that. And then the next week just kept moving on. And, the next prayers are a huge left turn. You hit Genesis 3, and it's God saying, like, what did you guys do? And they all point fingers at each other and especially point fingers at God, which is mind blowing. Essentially, the second prayer in the Bible is like, hey, God, it's your fault that I sinned. Which is like, oh, wow, that really nosedove from that first one and just kept going. And so my first book, that is out is called Praying with the Torah, and it just goes through Genesis, Exodus. There's not a single prayer in Leviticus, which blows my mind. I still think that I must have missed some, but every time I looked, I've not really found something that I really said this is for sure prayer. You could argue the sacrifices and things like that are, but nothing that's actually prayer. Um,
Mhm.
so it goes through Genesis, Exodus. I mentioned Leviticus, goes through Numbers and Deuteronomy. And then I get into the next chunk and I go Joshua, Judges, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, and praying with the former prophets. And then get into what we would tend to consider the like core prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so right now when people are watching this, you'll be able to get those first four. So it goes everything except for kind of like the hodgepodge collection in the like the Proverbs and Job and some of those. So that one's called Praying with the Writings. Will be out before the end of the year. I don't know exactly when I want to release that yet, but that'll be out this year. And I've finished writing the rest of the series too, so it'll go all the way from cover to cover. I just haven't finished editing and all those things yet. So all total, it's going to be an examination of every single prayer in the Bible from cover to cover, or everywhere that there's like a discussion of prayer in the Bible, or there's a few where it's like the Isaac story. After the whole story of Abraham and all the great prayers, Isaac doesn't pray once. And it's like, you have 11 chapters in Genesis. That's a big chunk, not one prayer. Certainly he did pray, but you don't ever see it. And like, that's just, I think what I talked about is like, I would hate for my life for people to look back and be like, this wasn't a guy who really prayed a whole lot. Like prayer wasn't a big deal with him. Like I'd want it
Mhm.
to be the people that it's like Jeremiah. There's so many prayers in Jeremiah, and it's just like, can we move on, Jeremiah? That it was very tedious working through Jeremiah because the whole thing is just him wrestling with God for the whole
Mhm.
book of Jeremiah, which is a huge book, and you're like, come on, Jeremiah, and then you're like, well, come on, me, because I wrestle with things too. Um, so it's really just this comprehensive look at how the Bible presents prayer through short little case studies.
Hmm. I love that too. I think that would just definitely be an interesting topic just for people to look at for themselves. So I mean, you kind of nailed like my next question, which was gonna be tell me about its importance, but you've already done that. So this
Well,
specific focus. Mhm.
well,
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say too with the importance of it. I feel like, I would assume at some point you either in your church or listening to, like the radio where sometimes you'll have sermons or different places, you've probably heard people teach on prayer. And
Mhm.
usually when somebody teaches on prayer, it's kind of an aside. Like we're talking about something and oh, there's prayer here and let's just mention that real quick and it'll be part of my one sermon. Or maybe they'll do a sermon series where it's kind of like what I described starting out with of just like I took a few passages. Sometimes you'll hear people preaching and it's like, well, here's kind of like my thoughts on prayer, which interestingly, Jesus did that. The in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, you have the Lord's Prayer and Jesus teaching on prayer, and that's really just him kind of hitting the high notes of his thoughts on prayer and his beliefs on prayer, which obviously carry some authority since it's Jesus. But so
Mhm.
I'm not saying that a pastor or a teacher shouldn't be like, well, here's kind of my highlights on prayer, but it's really easy to cherry pick when you do that. Not intentionally, maybe intentionally, depending on who it is, but certainly not necessarily intentionally. But if I say, here's the things that I found are most important, you can miss a lot.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of things as I was going through that I was like, I would never have thought to pray like that. Or I'd be ashamed to pray like that, or different things like that, where it's just if you aren't comprehensive with it, you only get the picture that you get. When you're comprehensive with it, you get a much more rounded picture. And so you do have prayers that are really, really great prayers. You've got, the high and lofty prayers that you see. You've got just really what I would describe as low prayers, where it's just like this blunt and desperate and short and ugly prayer. And both of them, God's just like, this is awesome that you brought this to me. You've got some really righteous prayers. You've got some really terrible prayers. Like I mentioned, they're the ones from Adam and Eve in Genesis 3. Um, Samson, the judge, he prays, I think, twice. I'd need to go back and double check, but he only prays like two or three times. And one of them is after he just murdered 1,000 people with an ox bone and then he's like, God, why aren't you giving me water? I'm going to die of thirst. What kind of God are you? I'm again paraphrasing, but it's
Oh
just
gosh.
like accusative prayer of like, God, what's your problem? Why am I like this when you should be taking care of me? Um, and God just like makes a well come up. And I'm not advocating praying like that, but it's just like, whoa, I would not have thought how that would come together. There's some cool stories where, like David is a great example where the first half of his life is just littered with prayer and he's doing all these great things. And then you've got the Bathsheba moment and prayer just completely drops out of his story. Almost. There's a few, but like it really drops down. And then the quality of his walk with God drops significantly. And so you can kind of see how it doesn't say that those things go hand in hand, but it does through the way the story's shaped and just different things like that. You really get a much bigger picture when you take the time to get that full comprehensive picture. So rather than like, oh, I just want the highlights and I'll get the gist of it, I really wanted something that would really say, like, let's get a big picture of how this is looked at from a bunch of different angles.
And I do want to ask you, like, the importance of prayer. That is one thing that I think a lot of people take for granted. Prayer works. Prayer works so much. But what I have been taught is that you have to be specific with what you're praying for because, specifics count, especially when you're looking for your future spouse, you're looking for God's direction in your life. So, for our viewers out there, can you explain the importance of a genuine prayer and what, like, a simple prayer might differentiate?
Sure. So I want to start out by just kind of addressing the specifics, and I want to present two different prayers that again I'm going to paraphrase. I don't have the whole thing memorized. Sorry, everyone. But think about when Abraham sends his servant to get a wife for Isaac. I think it's Genesis 24. Pretty sure it's 24. But he sends the wife for Isaac, and he's coming into town, and he's like, "Hey, God, this is a big deal. Like, it's very important to me. I take this job very seriously, and I see that it's a very serious thing. So here's exactly what I want to have happen to show me that things are going to work out the way that they like that that this is what's supposed to be happening." And it's a very specific prayer, like you said, like it is detailed. And it's really
Mhm.
tedious to go through the chapter because it goes through that like 3 or 4 times of what he prayed because he prays it and then it happens and then he tells them like I prayed for this and then and so it gets a little tedious, but it's like this was a really specific prayer that this unnamed servant offers up to God, and it's awesome that he had the boldness to very specifically say, "Here's what I am looking for." Um, then in Chronicles, I don't know the chapter off the top of my head, but Jehoshaphat, the king, um, calls all the people together because an army is coming. It's a big army. If I remember right, there's like 3 different kingdoms that are all allied together. They're coming to attack, and they all come together and they offer up a prayer saying, God, here's what's going on. We don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. That's the whole
Mhm.
prayer. And then God just like fills somebody with the spirit and he's like, "Oh, hey, I'm getting a message from God." He says, "I took care of it." Again, paraphrasing. And then they go out and the armies, the multiple armies that were all allied together turned on each other and killed each other. And they just spend a week just taking all the spoil from all the camp that was destroyed. And so there's no specifics in that. Um, and I think there's room for really the whole gambit. And so I think there can be hesitation with these specifics because it seems like, God, I need everything to be my way. And I think if you pray it like, God, you're going to do what I want, or this isn't okay, God's just going to be like, whatever. Like, you don't get to tell me that. He might answer like he did with Samson, but that's not really a great heart with prayer. But to say like, God, here's what I'm thinking. Even Jesus, like if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. Like here's what I want specifically is for me not to have to be crucified because it seems like it's going to be miserable, but I'm willing to trust you. And so I think that's kind of the heart in those specifics. And you can be very specific. And God is, he nowhere does he say, I'm going to do exactly what you ask for every time. But he promises that he's going to do what's good. And so I feel like that's important with the specifics. But to your bigger question of the importance of prayer, um, like you said, prayer can do a lot. Like there's a lot of power in prayer. James is, I think, what most people will think of, where there's the passage about like the prayers of a righteous man have a lot of power to affect a lot of change, sort of deal. And I feel like that's a great passage to cling to because they can, as you said, you can get a lot accomplished through prayer. Like it is very, very effective. Um, but I also think like we come to the question a lot of like, well, if God already knows what's best and he wants to give me what's best, what's the point of praying? And that's something I wrestled with a lot because it doesn't make sense. Why would I need to ask God to do something for me when he says that he already knows what I want and will do what's best for me? So like, what's the point? And with that mindset, like there is no point. God does not need your prayers in order to accomplish great things. He loves them, but he doesn't need the prayers. And so then why are we praying? And I like to kind of recontextualize it a little bit. Like the whole story of the Bible is about God bringing humanity into a family relationship. And so
Mhm.
then in the two biggest ways that God describes it is we're like his children and we're like his spouse. And obviously there's some if you think that through too much, that gets a little weird because like how can you be both? But just not digging into those how those would overlap too much. Think about in a family dynamic. If I'm a father and if my kids were like, well, why do I need to talk to you? You should just know what I want and give it to me. Well, yeah,
Mhm.
I do generally have an idea of what you need, and I do try to give it to you. But if your whole plan is to go through life and never talk to me, we don't have a relationship. If I were to
Mhm.
ask my wife, like, well, you should just know what I want and give it to me, I shouldn't have to talk to you ever. I'm probably sleeping on the couch that night. Like that's it's not a one, it's gonna create problems to vocalize those ideas, but two, like that's just not what a relationship's about. And so what's
Mhm.
the purpose of prayer? There isn't a purpose. It's just prayer is the goal. It's not a means to a goal, it is the goal. Like prayer is the act of being with God. I've written in into a different book, but I talk about like we're in exile from the Garden of Eden, and prayer is like I liken it to like the maybe some of your younger listeners won't know what I'm talking about, but back in the day, you used to have tin cans, and you would put a string between them, and if you stretched the string, you could speak into the can, and the person on the other end could listen into the can. And so like that's how kids a long, long time ago would like talk when they weren't supposed to be talking. They would, it was like a phone line, but with a couple cans and a string. And I liken it to that. It's like we're in exile, but God dropped us a tin can with a string and he's listening. He wants that relationship. And so it's the way that we get to communicate with him. It's the way we get to be a part of his life and he gets to be a part of our life. So like it, even just the idea of like what's the point of prayer, I feel like almost has to be offensive because it'd be like asking your wife what's the point of talking to you. it
Mhm.
what's the downside? Like I get to and is asking for the things I need kind of pointless? Yeah, but in the same way that like if my kid comes to me is like asking for dinner, like well of course I was going to make you dinner, but like thank you for like sharing with me and I'll take your ideas into consideration. I was planning this and you wanted that, so maybe I'll switch things up a little bit. And you do
Mhm.
see that where God does say, like, here's what I had planned, but I could do this and it'll still be good. There's not like a only one thing in any situation that could be good. There's wiggle room. And so God, he'll listen to our prayers and he'll do things and we get to be a part of what he's doing. Um, and that's a huge part of it. I think too, which this can get a little bit hairy, but when you think about when Abel gets killed, the blood soaks into the ground and it cries out to God, he says.
Mhm.
He tells Cain, like the blood right now, I can hear it crying. Like I
Mhm.
know what you did, so don't try to
Don't try
protect
to
me with
deny
that.
it.
And all throughout, it's really unfortunate the way it gets translated isn't. When I translate, I really like to use the same word throughout, which is bad translating, but it helps you recognize where the same ideas get used a lot. And all throughout the Bible, you see this term outcry get used to describe like where just bad things are happening and like the oppressed are crying out, whether it's people are crying out, blood's crying out, creation itself is crying out. There's this outcry for God to like we're suffering. And God can't stand that. You see all over that God is his emotions are churned up for him to move from the outcries of creation. And so I think as we're suffering, we can bring that and like maybe that's gonna people are gonna be weirded out by me saying it changes God's mind because I mean God has a plan and he's only gonna do what's good. um but he is moved to action. He is stirred up to things by the cries of his creation. And so all of that kind of comes together in this picture of, God wants to hear from us and it is powerful and there's a lot there and it allows us to have that relationship. And really, I feel like when you put it in a family dynamic, if we are treating him like he is our father and if he is the husband of the church, um why pray kind of takes on a very different light.
hmm And I actually think that's the best explanation I have heard for that question. Because a lot of people are just like, well, if he's God, he already knows. But yeah, but God wants a relationship. He wants a relationship. He wants you to talk to him. He's a very giving God. He's a very loving God because God is love. God's going to take care of his children no matter what because they're his children. But he helps more those who actually acknowledge him because they have that relationship with him. And I think, a lot of people they take that for granted. Like he's already knows what's good for you. Why wouldn't you ask him for what's good for you? Like you know, it's a one of those things, it's a worldly question that was the best answer I could possibly ever have heard. It's a family dynamic. And yeah, he wants to have that relationship and that conversation. So I love
And
that.
I and I
Yep.
don't think the prodigal son is really addressing that issue, but it does illustrate it well. Just to take an example that we all know well, when the one son basically goes to his dad and is like, "I wish you were dead, so can we just pretend you were, and I can take your money and I can leave and never have to deal with you again?" He takes the money and he runs, and the other son stays home with the dad, and when he's talking to that son later, he's like, "You've enjoyed the blessings of being a part of this family this whole time. He didn't. He didn't get any of that. But now he's welcome back and he gets." And so it's that relational dynamic of like when you are a part of the family, you get the blessings of the family. And when you walk away from the family, you don't get the blessings of the family. And so prayer is that participation in the family. It'd be like a kid, say your teenager just like comes out of their room, grabs their dinner and takes it back into their room and like just doesn't want to be a part of family time, doesn't talk to you while you're there. There's no please or thank you. Like you're alienating yourself from the family, so you don't get to enjoy the benefits of the family.
Oh yeah. That's also a really good way to put it too, for sure. It's definitely, yeah. And I noticed that too. The closer you draw to God's people, the closer you draw to the people who are genuinely God's loving people, that blessing, that embracing of that family, like how much they can pray for you, how much they can help you, how much you feel, just positive energy. Like God, God's in the room whenever you're surrounded by the people who have the fruit that they bear. We'll put it that way.
Sure.
You can feel it. And I know that too because I've been in churches that have not had the spirit. It was more like a selfish type of church. And I'm not going to call any churches out because God knows what churches those are. But then I gravitated towards my church. Me and my husband, we've been there for like 2 years, and um, just that whole family of believers has been so helpful, so inviting, so encouraging. We no longer feel set apart from the church itself because they've embraced us, but we've also embraced them too. So, it's a great change of pace for us, and we're noticing and thriving now, and a lot of the answers that we didn't have before are being answered. So we're just like, wow, thank you.
Well, and I mean, there's just so many aspects. I mean, you're talking about how it builds community between different believers, which I didn't even really get into that part, but like that's another layer to it. And when you think about like how Hebrews describes prayer of like coming into the throne room of God, it's a convicting thing as well. Like I think most people have the experience of the person that they know that acts like they're a Christian, maybe says they're a Christian, but you can tell just like you clearly are not making any effort to follow Jesus and you don't value his kingdom. And um but they say they are. And so I've found usually that person, if you ask them to pray about something, won't say no because that kind of outs them a little bit. And so I've used it as a method of like, I'm just going to ask you to pray so that you'll go stand in front of God. And it's
Mhm.
not my job to convert your heart. Like I can share truth with you, I can, show you love, I can, encourage you and do all the things, but like what is more powerful of a conversion method than to make someone go stand face to face with God? Or they don't follow through and pray, and then they've got that as a conviction method too. So I feel like it can be used evangelistically, it can be used to build community among believers, it can be used to build that relationship with God. I mean, there's so many elements and dynamics and facets of it. It's really, really a lot.
Which it definitely boils down to prayer is very, very important. So y'all pray, prayer works, and you should believe it a lot more than you do. For sure. So I have to know from you being an author, from you writing this series, what was your experience writing it? Because everybody has an experience when they write a book. So what was your experience writing this?
Let's see. So I started doing like the first case studies before I even intended on it being a book. in probably 2020, 21, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just finished my rough draft of the last manuscript in November of 2025. And still working on finalizing that. And so, I mean, it's been a long time working through this. I translated the whole book of Psalms when I was doing Psalms. I translated the entire New Testament while I was working through the gospel accounts and the epistles and all that. And so like there's a lot there. Excuse me. And so I can't really say that I had one experience. It was very convicting. I'm convicted all the time because I am definitely not at the mountaintop of what people can do with prayer. I am by no means a phenomenal prayer. I wouldn't say I'm even the best prayer that I know. Like I've got a buddy Mark. Mark, if you're listening, I'm calling you out. He's the best prayer I know. And I don't know that Mark's ever really studied prayer, but he's writing it down. He's got his prayer journal with him all the time. He's all about prayer. Like he's just like that's the guy that I think of when I think of prayer. Does a phenomenal job. And so like that's convicting. Like I have a 7-part series looking at every prayer in the Bible, and I have so much room to grow in prayer. So that's been convicting. It's been humbling to kind of look at different things that I did know about prayer and be like, man, I am dropping the ball. It's been humbling to look at things like, how did I never even think to do this? It's been convicting because there's been things that, like, I even say in a couple passages, I think, like, I don't think I could ever pray like this. Um, and maybe that's good that I wouldn't pray like some of the prayers, but at the same time, like, man, like there are some prayers in there that are just honest and brutal. Um, it shaped my prayer life tremendously. Um, I think, a lot of it just gives permission to pray in certain ways. Um, and going back to that relationship dynamic, like when you think about when a relationship is broken, and
Mm-hmm.
like you're upset with something that someone else did, in order for that to heal, you kind of have to have the accusation, right? You have to be able to say, like, you can say it nice or you can say it not nice, but essentially you're saying, like, I feel like you did wrong by me in these ways, or I have suffered wrong because of things that you've done or not done. And you might be completely wrong on those things. Like, you might talk it through and realize, like, oh no, like, you didn't do anything. And I misunderstood the situation, or maybe I was the one who did wrong, or what. And so, when you think about prayer, though, like how many of us are comfortable going to God and being like, God, I feel like you let me down here. God, I feel like you
Mm-hmm.
didn't keep your promises here.
Yeah.
But if we aren't willing to start those conversations and say, like, this is how I'm feeling, I don't need to say, you did mess up here, God, and this is your fault. I think if that's your starting point, start there. But I mean, even, to clean it up a little bit, be like, God, I feel let down here. I don't understand how you kept your promise because it doesn't feel like you did. And start the prayers there. Like that gives you a lot of license to really jump into those types of prayers and say, like,
Mm-hmm.
I am feeling like this isn't what I signed up for, what I was promised, what I know about you. And that can lead into really honest conversations. And so to me, that's been really transformative, is kind of allowing myself to be more honest in my prayers and not feel like I need to come with like these cleaned up or proper with like to really, Jesus says pray like he's our father, and to really have that relational dynamic of, we've got beef we need to air. And
Yeah.
he's never been in the wrong. There have been times it
Mm-hmm.
felt like it. There have been times where I didn't understand it, but like, he's not looking for my downfall. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah says, like, I didn't make creation to make it desolate. I made it to be abundant with life.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's what he wants for us. Like he didn't make us to be miserable and desolate. He meant for us to have abundant life. And we can come and be like, this doesn't feel like that. And I need
Mm-hmm.
some help here and I'm struggling. And to me, that was a big shift, was really kind of figuring that out. There were times that, it felt tedious. Like I said, I mentioned Jeremiah was I hated working through Jeremiah. It's uh, in the book that goes through Jeremiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. Um, Jeremiah, I think, took up close to 50% of that book that I wrote. Because there's
Mm,
just so many prayers in there, and it's so cyclical. And it's like, okay, you finally got it. Oh, nope, you didn't. And oh, okay, well, maybe nope, you didn't. And it's just going like this through the same things. And it was very, very tedious. But then I feel like some of those things too, like when you step back and you look at like, why is this so tedious? And um, you start to realize like because you're tedious. Like we are the tedious ones. We're exactly like that.
yeah.
Um, I did a youth group lesson with some real young kids several years ago. We were talking about judges and all the flip-floppiness of like they were following God and then they reject God. And we were in a gymnasium. And so I had the kids run from one side of the gym to the other every time they flip-flopped. And so, oh, they turned away from God, everybody run back there. And then they'd run across. And then, oh, they came back to God, everybody run over there. And like halfway through, I was, paraphrasing the book of Judges, but like halfway through, they're like, why do we have to keep doing this? And I'm like, that's exactly how God feels. Why do we have
Mm,
to keep doing this? And so,
yeah.
um, that's kind of how we are. And like you pay attention to the pacing of the prayers and the redundancy of the prayers, and there's reason behind all that. So it's been really, really interesting, really shaping, and I think more than anything, really convicting that I should pray better than I do because there's just so much room to grow with it.
Absolutely. And I just like to tell you, I really enjoyed our conversation today. You answered so many questions that I know a lot of our viewers are going to have. So whenever your book is ready, or if it is ready, how can they grab a copy of them?
Sure. So the first four books are for sale now. So that's Praying with the Torah, Praying with the Former Prophets, Praying with the Latter Prophets, and Praying with the Book of Praises. Because there's already a book called Praying with the Psalms, and Book of Praises is the Hebrew name for the book. So those four are as of the April 14th. You can buy all of those. The ones that aren't out right now are available for pre-order. I changed publishers, so a couple of them are re-releasing. But so all those are available now, and you can just get them wherever books are sold. They're on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian Book. I'm working with them to update exactly having all of them. But I mean, through whatever bookstore, if you have local bookstores, they can get them. So they can order them through just their normal book ordering system. Um, and can I give you links to put in the show notes?
Absolutely. Sure
Perfect. So
can.
I'll do that where you can find some of that stuff. But it's wherever books are sold. If you look up R.A. Sweeney, you should be able to find some of my books.
Absolutely. And do you also have social media where people may find you?
Absolutely. I'll give you those links as well, and we can put those. I've got Facebook and Instagram and a YouTube page where I post weekly kind of summaries of individual case studies from this series, some question and response type things, some good content there as well.
I love that. All right. So everybody, this concludes our episode for today. We will be back with another one. Thank you, Reed, for being on my show today. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a great discussion.
Absolutely.